So I think, and as I mentioned before, it's so embedded in our psyche and culture, it's very hard to shift that, but you have to take very conscious, I think, proactive efforts to do that. We were talking earlier about the fact that it's embedded even in the institutes themselves, who are trying to destigmatize the conditions that they're focused on.
By their names.
By their names, and also in published literature. It's not uncommon to see the term abuser, be individuals referred to as an alcohol abuser or a drug abuser, substance abuser, when by the same token we're publishing materials which are advocating against using those kinds of terms. So there's obviously a disconnect.
Daphne.
There are many people in the field who came into this field in the 70s and in the 80s when we were using the old language. So for each of us personally, this is a process of learning and enlightenment, and we each have to recognize our own language and first become conscious of what we're saying. And this is about raising consciousness about what are the words that we're using, what do they mean, how do they further stigmatize or label or keep people in a place that is negative as opposed to language that elevates. And we each have to come to this individually, and then we do it as a field, because language does indeed shape our thinking, and our thinking shapes our behaviors and our decisions, which of course shape our lives. And so our language can actually either affect positive change or keep us in a negative place. So we as a field, and it's fantastic that SAMHSA is hosting this conversation, because it's part of just raising awareness and talking with each other about what are we saying and what word does work. But we certainly, I think, can look at some of the words and say, this is not effective anymore, and we can move beyond that.
I think there's some other issues going on here, though. I think that there is a resistance to the move from the acute crisis model to the chronic care model for a lot of different reasons. And I think that language becomes one entity of that. So why are you saying that I can't use substance abuser? I've used it all the time. What's wrong with that? And I think that we have to recognize that. And then we do have to do a lot of presentations, a lot of discussions like this, and I really appreciate the fact that SAMHSA is supporting this new language.
Even within, and I have to admit, even within our own agency, I mean, our team in the Consumer Affairs Office checks, many materials that are going to be put out, and sometimes even internally it's very difficult to keep everyone on a straight and narrow path of using. Daphne was involved with us at one point in creating a document that is still out in draft, related to language and that people are using now. Do you remember that, Daphne?
I do remember, and it was based a lot on the work of William White, who has written so much on language and the rhetoric of recovery, and what words keep us stuck and what words move us forward. For example, the issue of relapse. We talk about relapse, and in other illnesses we might talk about a recurrence, or we might talk about reinitiation. But relapse somehow focuses on this was the expected negative outcome. And so again, it goes back to the consciousness and what are we conveying and what kind of expectations are we conveying with our language. And there are a number of those examples that can be found actually on William White's website, and other publications that have been done by SAMHSA and by Faces and Voices of Recovery. There are some wonderful resources to help us become more conscious of the language we use.
And that connects to the fact that what we can do within the treatment system. If you're working with a person and they understand the framework, they understand the stages of change, they understand that it may be a recurrence, that's not a negative thing, that may be a part of their stages of change, of their recovery, rather than relapse and the stigma that is connected to relapse. Relapse is this horrible place that once you fall down, that sometimes you don't get up from. So that's a way that we can work with the treatment system.
I also think that we're presenting really a moving target, if you will. It's probably what you would call the flavor of the month syndrome, and that also language is open to interpretation. Like prevention to somebody in the field would probably mean something that's an evidence-based practice, but if you talk to a community person, prevention would be keeping the recreation center open for hours. We talk things like paradigm shift or transformation, and all of these terms we use. So we have co-occurring, we have substance use disorder, we have substance abuser, we have chronic illness, we have disorder, and I think it's confusing. It's confusing to the field itself, and sometimes we fall into this trap where we think language is interchangeable. And I think it causes more harm than good.
You know, you've hit on something that I have observed over the last 13 years that I've been at SAMHSA. And that is that just when you get comfortable using one terminology, along comes someone else, and then they find, particularly not only in the substance use disorder field, but also in the mental illness field, right, John? I mean, it's just, you know, as difficult as we find the subject matter in the substance use disorder field, you know, the mental illness side also presents with, I think, some similar circumstances.
For sure. When you think about other disorders, for example, the disorder comes to mind quickly when, as a first cousin of substance use disorder, are eating disorders. Now, when you talk about eating disorders, we always, invariably, people use the term inside, outside of the field. They refer to it as an eating disorder, not as food abuse, and don't refer to them as food abusers. And that has grown up just in a very consistent fashion. There's always been eating disorders as far as I can remember. It's never been anything else. And I've never heard the term food abuser. So there are models for this kind of terminology which seem to be palatable, acceptable to most people when you're talking about food. But when it comes to substances, of course, we have this abuser term somehow has gotten into our language and culture and becomes very difficult to shift. And if I could just mention how this may be actually unconscious and the effects of it may be unconscious, is that we did a study where we randomly assigned the term abuser, substance abuser, and substance use disorders. We had those two terms. And these were mental health practitioners. Many of them were doctoral level. Over 500 clinicians doing this study. And they had a vignette which described someone with a substance-related problem. And the vignettes were identical except for the term used. So half the subjects got the vignette describing the individual as a substance abuser, and half of them got the individual described as having a substance use disorder. And then they were asked a number of questions about whether they perceive this person needed treatment versus should be punished, whether they had sympathy for the person, whether they were able to control their problem, so this kind of issue of self-regulation, whether they thought they were personally to blame for the problem that they had. And those who were assigned the substance abuser condition were more likely to have more punitive attitudes than those who had the substance use disorder condition. And these were doctoral level, mostly doctoral level mental health clinicians. So it may be that even unconsciously it triggers a bias that people aren't even aware of. I think this is very important because even though we may use the term ourselves thinking, well, I don't mean it like that, I mean it like this, I mean it in a more general sense, and I certainly don't mean it in a stigmatizing way, but what can be conveyed and picked up unconsciously perhaps is that it does elicit these more punitive attitudes towards these individuals.
And when we come back, we're going to continue to chat about that. And I think we need to get into a dialogue about how we can change this. We'll be right back.
It's important to be familiar with the proper terminology surrounding addiction and recovery. One of the terms you'll want to be familiar with is discrimination. Discrimination is treating someone less favorably than someone else because he or she has, once had, or is regarded as having a disability. For more information on this and other recovery jargon, visit the Recovery Month website.
People who suffer from drug or alcohol addiction sometimes say hurtful things. They drive the people who love them most away. If you know someone who suffers from drug or alcohol addiction, listen. Try to hear what they are really saying. know that there is hope and help them find their voice again. For drug or alcohol treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
They tell me I was there, but I don't remember. I don't know where I really was. I do not know what I had for breakfast. I do not know who won the game. I don't recognize this man.
If you or someone you know is struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, there is a solution. Recovery. Call 1-800-662-HELP for information and for hope.
Through treatment, my life's a whole lot brighter now.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Language is such an important part of communicating with people what addiction, mental health disorders, and recovery is all about. A lot of people have stereotypes about what these disorders are all about, and they're not accurate. And so using language can really help people understand what those disorders are about, what they mean, and how people are living successfully in recovery today. Our Stories Have Power was a training that was developed by Faces and Voices of Recovery in conjunction with funding from SAMHSA. People in the recovery community have been looking for a long time for language that they can use to really describe what it is that they've been through and what it is that they're trying to advocate for. So Faces and Voices of Recovery has used the training as an opportunity to create a video, a DVD, that can be sent around the country, can be put on the internet, can really be used in trainings and in workshops around the country so that more people have the terminology that's necessary to communicate our message to the broadest possible audience. There are three major sections of the DVD. The first is a 90-minute training video, which takes you through Faces and Voices of Recovery's media and message training, the actual core training itself. The second part of the DVD is a section called Keys to Successful Interviews. That section really is helpful for people who are going to be going into an interview situation and they need to brush up on some basic skills. And then the third section of the DVD contains all the materials, the PowerPoint materials, our message training, our tips on successful media interviews that folks can use to further their skills as they go along through this training. You have recently gotten involved with Faces and Voices of Recovery, Laura. Tell me why you got involved with Faces and Voices of Recovery and what brought you to this work?
I am so thrilled to be part of this organization. I'm really proud to be part of it. They have a message that is very near and dear to my heart, which is sharing the message of hope and recovery to having a new way of life. I took away from the messaging training that I attended last fall that there are the right words to use and not so good words to use. For example, we want to talk about recovery. We don't want to talk about addiction. Addiction is where people are stuck in the problem. Recovery is where people get into the solution, and that's what it's all about, giving people hope and healing and a new way of life.
Some of the main questions that we receive is, what kind of training is this? And when you say media message training, that means that if the media put a microphone and camera to my face and say, Joe, I heard that you used drugs and alcohol before, and who are you? And how do I respond to the media, and how do I respond to where the community and the public can know that the benefits of long-term recovery? I think the main message there is that people in long-term recovery can move on to advocate for people with addictions and people to also get long-term recovery like they did. The message is real clear that the benefits of recovery, it works. And that's a reality for many people that's in recovery today.
Laureen, you wanted to
Yeah, I really want
comment.
to comment on something that Carlos said and connected to what John was saying. Carlos talked about the confusion around the language, and John talked about the research that really showed how using strength-based language, how it impacts the person. And I think that there is this flavor of the day language. I mean, chemical dependency, it's always something different. But I think there's an opportunity here for us to really show the leadership, because I think the difference is that this language that we want to promote is actually something that's going to help people. It is the right thing to do. So I think rather than it being this floating flavor of the day, that we actually have to take the leadership and make sure that people are using language that is going to promote this culture of recovery.
But particularly now, I think with the healthcare reform, Daphne, do we have an opportunity here in order to really turn things around?
We have a huge opportunity here. The country is talking about healthcare reform. The country is talking about health, and this is time to take this issue out of the crime pages and into the health pages. This is a health issue, and when we begin to understand that fundamentally in our own hearts, from academia to clinicians to the folks working in our prisons and jails, to understand that we are talking about individual health. This is a gigantic opportunity, and it's a wonderful opportunity, because this changes the way people see themselves. A lot of people who have suffered with addiction suffer from just horrible feelings of inadequacy, shame, isolation, and so forth. And when you learn that this is actually something that you have an ability to begin to treat, that other people have overcome themselves, that this is about health, and when you can move from saying, I feel sick, to I feel well, as opposed to going from I feel, I'm a bad person to a good person. We're talking about moving from sickness to health. So yeah, it's a great opportunity.
And I'd like to mirror Daphne's comments. I'm really, really excited about national healthcare reform, but I also feel that it's wrought with pitfalls, because I believe we're going to interject a whole new set of language into the conversation, if you will. Did a lot of organizing around the Parity Act and making sure that substance abuse was included in the language in the
Substance
Wellstone.
abuse?
Right? Yes, because it was the Wellstone Mental Health
Substance
Parity
abuse?
Act.
Am I hearing substance abuse?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And Daphne has quoted Bill White